Hey, welcome to the Black Fathers Pause podcast. I'm Dr. Alvin Thomas, clinical psychologist and associate professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I study fathers and their children. But here's the thing, we don't hear enough real conversations about black fathers, about what they're building, what they're dealing with, what they actually believe. That's what we're doing here. Voices from the Second City, Black Fathers Building Tomorrow, is all about real fathers, real stories, real impact in Chicago. Whether you're a father, a parent, someone who cares about family and community, stick around. This conversation is for you. Let's go. At 15 years old, he became a father. The world told him that he should disappear. Instead, he chose to build. Today, Dr. Clinton Boyd Jr. leads one of Chicago's most important organizations dedicated to ensuring Black fathers are valued as essential assets to their families and communities. His story isn't about overcoming fatherhood, it's about how fatherhood became the foundation for everything that he would become. Welcome back to the Black Fathers Pulse. I'm Dr. Alvin Thomas, and this is part of our special Chicago series, Voices from the Second City Black Fathers Building Tomorrow. And today, we're talking with a man who knows from lived experience and rigorous research what it takes to transform a young father's life into a powerful force for change. We're exploring how fatherhood, even when it arrives early, even when the odds are stacked against you, can become your greatest strength. This is the story of Purpose Rebuilt. This is Dr. Clinton Boyd Jr. Dr. Boyd, welcome to the Black Fathers Pulse podcast, and thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, brother, for extending an invitation, and I'm humbled and honored to have an opportunity to speak on your platform.
Thank you so much. So I want to jump right into the conversation because I want to start where your story really begins at 15 years old when you became a father. And most people are thinking, and I'm sure you're also thinking, and I'm thinking, well, that's pretty young. That's transformative. Walk us through that moment. What was happening in your life, and how did that shift everything?
Yeah. So I oftentimes tell folks I became a father at the age of 15 because that's when my daughter was conceived. And that's when I began to do a lot of the identity work around what it was going to mean for me to show up as a father in a life that I had helped to create and a life I was going to be responsible for helping to shape and mold. However, I was 16 when my daughter was born. And I oftentimes just bring that up intentionally in the conversation because oftentimes folks assume that your fatherhood journey begins at the time that your child is brought in or born into the world. Whereas for me and so many other fathers that I've connected with from the point of conception and the point of them finding out that they have a child on the way, that's when they really start to think long and hard about what having a child is going to mean for them in their life. And I was no different at the age of 15, growing up in inner city Chicago. Um, from the West Side, grew up in the Austin community primarily, but I spent a lot of time in North Lawndale and West Garfield. And we're talking about the early 2000s. It was a lot happening within the city. It was a lot of things that I was exposed to that, quite frankly, robs children of their innocence when you're going
Mhm.
out into a world that is ripe with injustice, and that injustice produces material consequences that make it hard for the sunlight of justice to come through the clouds and bring forth all of the prosperity that's associated with living in a just society. And so, from a very young age, I always could feel the injustice that was taking place in my city. I didn't have the words or the language to express or articulate what I was feeling. But being in that type of environment, I engaged in certain life choices that led to youthful misbehaviors
Mhm.
and the consequences that come along with them. And that's how I ended up with a child at the age
Mhm.
of 15. I oftentimes tell folks I was like the fire hydrant. Like I was close to the street, but I wasn't really
Right,
in it.
right.
But I had a time when I was outside, and my daughter is living proof of just how much fun I was having at the age of 15. but but in truth, um, I oftentimes tell folks that becoming a father at 15 years old was the single most defining moment of my
Mm,
life. It was really at that age when typically you're trying to figure out who you are, you're thinking about school, you're thinking about sports, friends, what you want your future to look like. But for me, all of a sudden, I was
mhm.
responsible for helping shape someone else's future. And so my
Right.
future was not just about me anymore. And so I remember experiencing a range of emotions during that time. And what I've grown to appreciate is a lot of those emotions associated with fatherhood are
Mhm.
always lingering over your head as a parent, like
Mhm.
fear, uncertainty, anxiety, a profound sense of responsibility, accomplishment. Like these were the experiences and the emotions rather that I was having at the age of 15. Um and me being a young black boy, because I was a boy who
Mhm.
was taking
Mhm.
on an adult responsibility, a lot of folks often viewed me through the lens of the stereotype, like the
Mm,
deadbeat dead black father, and
mm,
that just never aligned with how I intended to show up in my daughter's life, because I was incredibly proud to know that I was about to become a father at the
mhm.
age of 15. Like I wore it as if it was a badge of honor, not fully understanding
Right,
the
right.
responsibilities that were going to come with it. Again, I was 15, so in hindsight, developmentally, there was only so much that I was going to be able to offer in that type of situation. But the one thing I will never allow anyone to take away from me is the immense pride I
Mm,
had in knowing that I had the responsibility, that God had just trusted me with the responsibility
yeah.
to shape someone else's future. And I was committed to doing the best job that I possibly could. So,
So thank you so much for that. There are a few things that you mentioned. One, the idea that um, as you're at 15 years old, thinking about the impending birth of this child, you've already begun to think about what it means to be a father. And
mhm,
you're thinking about what is to come as much as you could imagine. And what your identity looks like, how that changes your identity. And that's even before the child is born. And
mhm,
often the conversation about fatherhood is not from that perspective. It's only after the child is born that we start to think
mhm,
of the father. And so recognizing that men are thinking about fatherhood, men are considering the changes and appreciating the joy of fatherhood and being affected by both by the decision and the outcome of that decision related to fatherhood. Another thing you said was that at 15, you were thinking about the injustices that you're about to bring a child into, the injustices that you yourself
right.
were navigating. And I can't shake from my head the most recent, and maybe we might find time to talk about it somewhere later in this conversation, or maybe not. But I can't, as you said that, I can't shake from my head the two most recent ones that we
Mhm,
heard about. The 14-year-old in North Carolina who was killed because his killers were found not guilty, so we cannot say murdered, but was killed for an allegation. So he didn't steal from what we understand, but he was run down and killed. And the most recent news that came out that Carmelo Anthony, I think his name is, was found guilty of murdering another teen, um, in a what some people are describing as a self-defense or in an
Mm-hmm.
altercation between teenagers. One was killed. One felt like his life was threatened, and this young kid, this teenager, is now looking down the barrel of a 35-year sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm thinking to myself, and Clinton Boyd was also facing a major life change at 15 years old. So I think in my head, I was just thinking, wow, the kinds of big decisions that some of our kids are facing. And
Mm-hmm.
as you were facing that decision at 15 years old, in another interview, you mentioned that fatherhood broke you down and rebuilt you simultaneously. And I find that powerful. It's a powerful way to describe it. But can you help our Chicago listeners and others understand what you meant, both the breaking down part and the rebuilding part?
Yeah, I mean, again, when I reflect on 15-year-old Clinton, as someone who's 37 now, I'm always in awe of my 15-year-old self in terms of the big ideas that I had about the world, the way that I
Mhm,
embraced fatherhood, and saw it as a way to pay something forward of value. Um it, it it brought a sense of direction and purpose to my life that I didn't necessarily have at that stage in my evolutionary development. And that's why
mhm,
I say it broke me down, because it forced me to confront myself. It forced me to confront my future in a way that suggested I'm not just living for me anymore. I'm living
mm,
for me and mine. And mine is my daughter, who I helped to create and bring into this world. And I knew what my life had looked like up until that moment. I again had very big feelings and big
mhm,
thoughts about the world as it was, and I knew deep within me that there's another world that has to come into existence that's going to move this one out, because
mm,
of all of the inequities that permeate the society. And so I was thinking about what is going to be my role and my responsibility to my daughter to leave her a better world. The rebuilding part was really it really happened because fatherhood demanded a different version of me. It,
mm,
like, simply put, it required me to be more disciplined, more intentional, more resilient, more accountable. It was going to force me and was forcing me how to love differently and love
mm,
better, because there's this element of emotional vulnerability that's associated with parenthood in
yeah.
general and fatherhood specifically. Especially if you think about the way that young boys are socialized within this
Mhm,
society in terms of how to show up in the world based upon these societal expectations that are thrust
mhm,
upon us. For me, I've always taken a chance to let my daughter express to her, show her I love her, not just through
mhm,
words, but through actions. And in the environment that I grew up in, showing that level of emotional vulnerability comes at a cost, right? Like, a real one. So again, fatherhood was just teaching me these lessons about growth and evolution and
Mm,
about selflessness. It was teaching me about discipline and playing the long game and
mm,
making sure that I don't put myself or my family in any compromising positions. Like this is these are the thoughts that I'm having as a young
right.
father, and this is what allowed me to navigate my way through Chicago to the point where I received and continue to receive a great deal of respect from my peers who I grew up with because they admire
Mm,
my willingness and ability to be not only a stand-up father, but someone who's striving to be a stand-up man in the context of the work that I'm doing at Fathers, Families, and
mhm.
Healthy Communities. And so I never separate the personal from the professional. If anything, I just say that this is my divine
100%.
calling
Yeah.
and I'm fulfilled in the work that I'm doing, and that's what matters more than anything else.
So I think the thing that strikes me most about your journey is that you didn't just survive becoming a young father. He's a
Hmm.
young father. He didn't fail. That's great. You moved beyond that.
Right.
You shattered all of the negative expectations, the stereotypical expectations. You went to college. You earned a master's degree. You became a PhD. You became a researcher, a scholar, an advocate. You did
Hmm.
all of that while still under a very sharp societal microscope that suggested that you should not have succeeded, that you were not going to succeed, that you had committed the unpardonable sin of teenage
Hmm.
pregnancy, and that you are
Right.
now you are now going to be a statistic, and
Hmm.
you used all of that to propel you not just in the fatherhood space, the intimate, personal fatherhood space, but in the professional and community space. Your
Right.
work at Family Focus early in your career connected you with Black parents returning home from prison, connecting them with community resources. And that's significant work, but it also shaped your understanding of what Black fathers in Chicago were actually facing. What did you learn in those 2 years that changed how you think about fatherhood today?
Great question. Professionally, I always tell people that it was my work at Family Focus Lawndale in Chicago's
Mhm,
North Lawndale community that really served as a launching pad for what my work would consist of professionally and academically.
mhm,
So Family Focus Lawndale is a family support service organization that's based in the North Lawndale community in Chicago. And at the time, while I was in my master's program, I was the peer support group specialist for our Mission Me and Fatherhood group. And so we had a partnership with the Safer Foundation at the time, who had adult transition centers in the North Lawndale community. A lot of the men who were coming into those facilities were also fathers. And so we had forged a strategic relationship with the Safer Foundation, and we were working directly with these brothers, largely brothers, but not exclusively brothers, who were coming
mhm,
home from prison after being away for 10, 15, 20, 30 years,
mhm,
overwhelmingly because of nonviolent drug offenses, right?
mhm,
And this was back in 2011 when I was doing this work to 2013. And so we hadn't even got into a place societally where we had started this like decarceration,
mhm,
movement. Like this was on the heels of Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow.
mhm. Right, right,
So like the
right,
conversation was just now starting to shift in a major way when I was
right.
doing this work. But up close and personal, I'm looking at all of these men come through the doors of our organization with the same stories of
Mhm,
tribulations, but also some
mhm,
triumphs. but
Right.
so many of them were beat down emotionally,
Yeah.
financially, physically, spiritually, where you could feel the lack of hope
Hmm.
within them
Hmm.
whenever they talked about their life circumstances.
Right.
And this is when I was becoming acquainted with a lot of scholarship, such as William Julius Wilson's When Work Disappears. I read that for the first time when I was in my master's program. Reading Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. Got introduced at this time to W.E.B. Du Bois and his writings. I hadn't really sat with his scholarship thoroughly at that point, but what I was picking up was speaking to my intellectual curiosity. But I'm reading this scholarship and then I'm looking at my community and I'm looking at the
Right.
men in my community. And it was in that moment when I was like, this is beyond personal responsibility. This has much more to do with irresponsible policies that are
Mm.
having a deleterious, disproportionate negative impact on black and brown and poor people in our
Mm.
society. And I ultimately decided that I wanted to study the topic more so I can support my people from a place of wisdom, knowledge, and intelligence. And that's what ultimately led me to pursue my PhD. And I landed at Georgia State University in Atlanta for about 6 years. And immediately afterwards, transitioned to the Cook Center at Duke
Mhm.
University for my postdoc.
Even beyond that, you've been named an Aspen Fellow. You're a researcher in Chapin Hall. You're a Prevent Child Abuse America board member, nationally recognized for the work that you're doing. And yet you continued specifically in the Chicago neighborhoods that you grew up with, in the city that you grew up in, the state that you grew up in. I think a through thread, a continuous story that really excites me about the work that you're doing is what you've shared publicly. And I think you've shared a little bit about it today, that you're fundamentally strengths based. You don't lead with
Mhm.
what Black fathers lack, you lead with what they bring. You talk about them as assets to their families and communities. And to me, that is a critical reframe. Where does that reframe come for you?
Nah, I mean, first and foremost, my father.
Mm.
He's somebody who has played a central role in my life, throughout my life, in every season of my life. My father has been able to offer me something very special. He's a man who's perfectly imperfect, like all of
Mhm.
us, but he's a man who loves deeply, and I've reaped the benefits of his love throughout my life. And
Mhm.
so, having that type of example in front of me day in and day out has always served as a blueprint or a model for what fatherhood in general should look like,
Mhm.
but also for what black fatherhood is in this country. And so that is something that I carried into my own fatherhood experience with my children. And it's always been the perspective I've brought to bear through the research as it pertains to fatherhood and family strengthening. And then now, as a nonprofit organizational leader, I'm ensuring that all of our programs start with this fundamental truth that our men are assets to child, family, and community well being. Untapped assets, albeit, but
Yeah.
assets nonetheless. And
Yeah.
it's our job, it's our role, it's our responsibility as a community to not throw away the folks that people believe are incorrigible or
Mm.
irredeemable We
Mhm.
have a responsibility to build our people up, not call them out, but call them in.
Mhm.
And in the process of us calling them in, hopefully we can work together in a way that allows them to unlock their human potential in its totality so they can not only be a beacon of hope and inspiration for their children, for their families and their communities, but be a beacon of hope and inspiration for the whole world. And this is also part of the reason why we take a strengths based approach at FFHC. We are largely, and the founders are the ones who laid this foundation, Afrocentric organization. We recognize that
Mhm.
our history did not start in those 1619 on the white line, or it didn't start in no 1555 for folks who subscribe to that school of thought, and we
Mhm.
came here on a ship named Jesus. Like, no,
Right.
we come from a continent that has given civilization to the world. Right. And so, like, when you know that history and you are connected to your people in that way, and you see the majestic beauty in our ancestral lineage, there's a
Mhm.
degree of
Mhm.
self confidence that you have, because that self confidence is rooted in the proper education of self. When you know who you are and whose you are, you don't allow anybody outside of your community to come into your community and dictate to you what's best for your community. Like, that's just a non-starter, because I know who I am. I know who you try and tell me I am,
Right.
but but no, that's not me, and that's not my people. And so again, that's the perspective that we operate from within FFHC. And let me calm down a little bit because I feel myself getting fired up.
Yeah, I love it. So I am going to hope that I can stoke that fire a little bit more. But so you've worked in Chicago. You know the neighborhoods. You've run some of these neighborhoods as a fire hydrant. You,
Right, right,
you mentioned
right.
earlier. You know the fathers. You know the stories. You know the challenges: housing instability, over policing, economic barriers, limited access to structural supports, feeling of being pressed down, oppressed, hopelessness. All of those are real, everyday experiences for fathers. That sometimes the policies, the blind policies, the colorblind, the historically blind policies. Let me calm down. Historically blind policies choose not to see.
Hmm.
What are you witnessing on the ground? What does real fatherhood in Chicago look like when we strip away all of the statistics and the policies and just look at a man and his child or children and family?
Well, in the context of the work we're doing at Fathers, Families, and Healthy Communities, what I witness every day is extraordinary commitment. I
Mm,
see fathers who are navigating obstacles that would overwhelm most people, and they're still finding ways to show up for their children. I see fathers, taking multiple buses across the city to get
mm,
to work, to get to their children's medical appointments and dental visits. I see fathers that's rebuilding relationships after incarceration. I see
mm,
fathers supporting children across multiple households,
mm,
while also navigating their child support obligations,
mhm, mhm,
employment challenges that they may have, and oftentimes, unfortunately, housing instability and insecurity.
mm,
Um, I I see fathers who may have every reason to disengage. They still choose to show up in ways that make sense to them. even if others can't fully appreciate the motivation behind some of their conscious parenting decisions, it doesn't
Hmm.
change the fact that the fathers still have their children on their mind, right?
Mm.
And there's still something to be said about a father making mental space for his child or his children or his family to be present, because this society will make you believe that we don't have those type of thoughts,
Yes.
nor do
Yes.
we possess the capability to
Yes.
hold them. And
Yes.
so, too
Yes.
often, conversations about Black fathers begin with what's wrong with them, opposed to
Yes.
like what's working, and that
Yeah.
really hasn't been how I've thought about this this work. And so again, when I just think about fatherhood in Chicago, I don't always think about the statistics. I think
Right.
about sacrifice. I think about
Mm.
persistence. I think about men who are continuing to show up despite
Hmm.
the systemic and structural barriers that were and continue to be purposely erected. And
Mm.
that's a conversation that we have to have much more intentionally, given the socio political, geopolitical
Mm.
environment that we're operating within in this moment.
No, that is powerful. I mean, a person could oversimplify it and reduce it to a dehumanization of a particular group.
Hmm.
The suggestion, the assumption that these people are just not interested in their children, are just not going to be good fathers, and the family is not missing anything, the child is not missing anything. And then, of course, turn around and demonize the mother who is struggling to do it by herself because of the kinds of policies that have been enacted. Um, but from all of the stories I keep hearing on this podcast, and there are a few that are coming up that are doozies, and from yours, what I'm hearing is men who are having children and are saying, "I am committed to being here, regardless of what it costs me,
Right.
personally and otherwise. So I am showing up with a smile on my face and a gift or the provisions for my child, but I don't know what I'm going to be eating. And I don't know my own physical health status, but my child is
Hmm.
going to see that doctor. I don't know what's going to
Right.
happen to me tomorrow. I feel like nothing is happening that is positive in my life except for my child, and
Hmm.
I'm carrying all of that, and nobody seems to care that I'm carrying all of that. And I don't want somebody to throw a parade for me either, but
Right.
I want it to be known that I am here doing what I should be doing as a man, as a father, that I'm here doing it. What would you say, as we kind of start pulling this to a close, what would
Hmm.
you say to a young father in Chicago right now, or any father in Chicago right now? Maybe someone who is listening to this, who became a father at a young age, who doesn't have all of the structural supports, who may not have grown up with their father, but who's trying to figure out how to be present and to provide short term, medium term, long term for their child. What do you want that father to know?
That they matter, they're
Mm.
valued, and they're valuable. They're
Mm.
valued by, they first have to be valued by themselves. So this is what
Mm.
self-love, self-respect,
Mhm.
self-knowledge comes more clearly into the picture. Because when you know who you are and you know the type of man you're striving to be, the type of father you're striving to be, and you develop and create a roadmap for your life that
Hmm.
is steeped in positivity and
Hmm.
steeped in righteousness, you will always have the opportunity to grow, evolve, blossom into who God intended you to become. And
Hmm.
when you as a person begin to fire on all cylinders in that way, it's
Hmm.
going to bring so much peace and prosperity into your life that
Hmm.
it's going to benefit your immediate and extended family. And
Hmm.
so if there's anything that I could share with a father out there, young, older, black, white, Latino, whatever the case may be, but especially black fathers, know
Hmm.
that you matter. And know that when you're given opportunities, support, and your dignity is affirmed, you'll always rise to the occasion. I've seen it
Hmm.
in my own life. I've seen it in the hundreds and perhaps thousands of fathers I've worked with throughout my career thus far. I've seen it in communities, not just throughout Chicago or the
Right.
Chicagoland area, but even during my time in metropolitan Atlanta, even during my time in the Raleigh Durham area. I've seen it in so many spaces and places that the fathers will rise to the occasion when they're properly supported. The thing, however, that I want to share with folks too is we can't allow others to do our portion of the work. There's
Right.
still a portion of the work that we have to do
Right.
as men and as fathers
Yeah.
that requires a degree of humility.
Yeah.
It requires us to acknowledge that we're not currently the best version of
Right.
ourselves, and therefore we must continuously seek truth and allow truth to bring forth the light of understanding into
Yeah.
our eyes and our lives so we can then move our families and our communities forward in a way that commands and demands power,
Yeah.
self respect, and self dignity. And our humanity will be affirmed immediately
Hmm.
afterwards because we'll be in charge of our own destiny.
Hmm.
Nobody from the outside will be dictating to us what's best for our families, what's best for our communities. You know, just thinking about that whole dehumanization
Hmm.
comment that you made earlier. If we're truthful about the matter, when you examine the foundational documents of this country, it can be the original US Constitution,
Hmm.
it could be
Hmm.
the Declaration of Independence. The folks who crafted and created those documents, they clearly saw us through a very unique lens. And when you examine that unique lens, it's obvious to me that they didn't have any plans on affirming our humanity.
Right. Right. Right.
And so again, when I think about where we're at today, it's unfortunate, but it's not unsurprising.
I appreciate everything that you said. Um, I want to take you back to 16-year-old Clinton Boyd Jr. You're with your daughter, and I want you to remember the first time she looked at you and you could tell that she could see you. I want you to tell us what it felt like, what you experienced the first time she reached out and grabbed your finger And I know these little people they're really strong. When they grab your finger, they grab it like
Hmm.
like there's no tomorrow. What did that feel like when she first grabbed your finger and she looked into your eyes?
Um, Unspeakable joy.
Hmm.
It was surreal in so many ways to see a child be born that I helped to create,
Hmm.
and to know that she immediately became a part of my legacy.
Hmm.
Um, it is to me one of the greatest gifts that I can offer the world. That's how I think of
Hmm.
my children. Like,
Right.
despite everything that I may do professionally, academically, to support others, to uplift the community, my greatest work of all will always be me personally engaging in the act of fathering with my children, because the goal is for them to go further than me in life.
Hmm.
And in order to do so, I need to be present in particular ways. I have to teach specific lessons. I have
Right.
to model myself in very unique ways in order for them to feel as if they're getting or reaping the benefits of me being their father. And so when I think back to when my daughter was first born, when my son was first born, me holding them for the first time,
Hmm.
I just go back to unspeakable joy, and then the immense responsibility that comes along with
Hmm.
making sure I, I'm a good shepherd.
Yeah. 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 Thank you so much. Dr. Clinton
Yeah, no
Boyd
problem.
Jr., thank you. Thank you so much. Your work, your mission, your lived example, it matters. It's changing how we think about Black fathers and Black fatherhood in Chicago and beyond. And for listeners who want to connect with Dr. Boyd's work to learn more about fathers, families, and healthy communities, to get involved or support the mission, we'll have all of those links in our show notes. And you can find FFHC at ffhc.org. This has been the Black Fathers Pulse, and I'm Dr. Alvin Thomas. We are part of a special Chicago series, Voices from the Second City, Black Fathers Building Tomorrow, made possible by the generous support of the Field Foundation. If you've been moved by this conversation, if Dr. Boyd's journey or his work resonates with you, please share this episode. Tag us on social media. Let us know what fatherhood means to you, because these conversations, these real, honest, strength centered conversations about what it means to father and be fathered in Chicago, they matter. They change narratives, they build community, they inspire the next generation. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week for another voice of the Second City. Man, I love these conversations. If this episode hits you, if you want more, follow us. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Let's build this community together. The Chicago series of the Black Fathers Pulse is made possible by the generous support of the Field Foundation. Music by Makaya De Silva. Opinions shared on this podcast are those of the host or the guest and are in no way affiliated with the universities of Wisconsin. New episodes drop every other week. You don't want to miss the next voice. Until then, take care of yourself and the people you love. This is the Black Fathers Pulse.